path of least resistance and most expense is to simply postpone it, and we'll poll the council for a date in January. But if the council wants to set it for a date certain, you could always modify that at your next meeting, which is Tuesday. So you could pick a date today, and you could continue it, for example, to next week, only for the purpose of setting a permanent date, for example.
Well, a couple of comments. Because the city manager raised the number of council members, I want to stress that the reason for my motion is not the number of council members on the dais. It's other reasons. I wouldn't set the date for next week. I think that would create all sorts of confusion and expectations in the community. But I'd be comfortable, for instance, if it will save us any expense, time, and make it easier for the public on saying, let's continue this for the moment to January 9th. And then next week, once staff's had a chance to speak to the applicant, the appellant, and council members, if we do need to change that, we can. But for now, let's just have the motion be that
So that even if we pick a date tonight, that can be moved.
Right.
It just prevents us from having to renotice it from the beginning. Is that correct?
That's correct. So just as a suggestion, perhaps the second date in January would be the most likely.
okay,
to
so
give you
9 plus
time.
14 is 23. So I'll amend my motion. I've been accommodating so far. Why not amend it again? To continue the item to January 23rd.
Okay, and is that friendly to the seconder?
Yes, it is.
All right, so the motion is to continue item 6A to January 23rd, 2018. Is that a correct restatement of the motion?
With the addition of the year, yes.
Yes, yeah, 2018, I think I said that. All right, Ms. Anderson-Warren, can we have is there any further discussion?
Actually, it's a direction, I believe. I'm not even sure you need to take a roll call.
Oh, all right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Then the motion carries.
And let me say thank you for letting me do that before we even got to the consent calendar, but I know there are a number of people in the community who are planning to come down here tonight, and I hope to forestall as many unnecessary trips as possible in the interest of climate change and the city's sustainability policies.
Right, no, and I appreciate that. So I know we're not on KCRW yet, but to the extent that people are viewing us either on the city's website or on city TV, they should know that item 6A will not be heard tonight. And if they haven't headed down in this direction yet, they don't need to.
Social media may help us in this case.
That's right. Thank you, everyone. And we apologize for the late notice, but sometimes things happen. All right, that leads us to closed session, I believe, Ms. Anderson-Warren?
Yes, you have two closed session items. You have existing litigation. It's Atwood versus the City of Santa Monica. And then you have an anticipated litigation, two cases, one for 1413 Palisades Beach Road, and the second one is for 1405 Palisades Beach Road, and you have no request to speak.
All right, I'll turn to the city attorney and get an estimate for our return time.
6:30.
All right, we will adjourn to closed session and return at approximately 6:30. Thank you.
Okay, well, we dodged the bullet.
just need you to talk.
Good evening.
Okay.
Thank you for having me.
All right, we are back from closed session. So with that, we will turn to the city attorney and ask for a report out.
Both items on the agenda were discussed with no reportable action taken.
Great, thank you. I guess we're on the 2 items now?
Yes, we have item 2A, which is the city manager's report, "'Tis the Season to Buy Local," a report on initiatives of the Buy Local Santa Monica Committee. And you have no request to speak. Give me a second, let me pull it up for you.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and Council. Honorable Council. Delighted to be here. My name's Jennifer Taylor. I'm with the city's Economic Development Department. And I'm going to be here to talk about the 'Tis the Season to Buy Local in Santa Monica and the initiative of the Buy Local campaign. So real quick background, the Buy Local campaign was established in 2009. It's a partnership between the city and the Santa Monica business community. We work closely with our 4 business improvement districts, the Chamber of Commerce, Santa Monica Travel and Tourism, Sustainable Works, really with the effort of supporting our local businesses and raising awareness about the community, environmental, and economic benefits of buying local. And on that note, this is an important time of year for many of our businesses with the holiday seasons. And one of our flagship initiatives that we do every year is our 'Tis the Season to Buy Local. And there's 2 elements to the campaign. There's the Perfect Gift Guide and the holiday events. Nope, sorry. So the Perfect Gift Guide, we put out a call out to all of our businesses to see what types of holiday gifts they wanted to promote and feature for this year. We gave them 2 categories. There's the ultimate buy local gifts, so stuff that is truly unique, sustainable, handmade. And then we also had the category of buy local gifts on a budget. And that's just to help to convey that there's something for everyone and that buying local does not have to be expensive. And this is just a sampling of different submissions that we received. So the Buy Local Gift Guide, the Perfect Gift Guide, we launched it in the Santa Monica Daily Press, 'Tis the Season publication. That hit the streets in early November at the launch of ICE, and then that's been promoted and distributed at our farmers markets and our various holiday events. The full gift guide is online on our buylocalsantamonica.com website, and this year we also launched on our Facebook page the image gallery featuring things. So I encourage you all to go on. There's lots of really cool things on there, stuff for everyone from handmade guitars, that's at McCabe's at the far left, to bespoke art and pottery and toys for kids and jewelry and gift packages and things from our farmers market. And then the second element of 'Tis the Season is the holiday events. And this is just an umbrella of all the free community events in our business districts we're helping to promote. So we launched, it kind of kick-started that with Small Business Saturday on November 25th. Montana Avenue had their Small Business Saturday sidewalk sale, and many businesses throughout the city did Small Business Saturday promotions. And then last week, there was a bunch of activities. Main Street had their annual holiday event, Montana Avenue. This weekend, we're excited for the Pico has their holiday hop, and they're doing a trio holiday celebration to celebrate Christmas, Hanukkah, and Kwanzaa at Virginia Avenue Park on Saturday. The mayor's going to be leading his monthly bike ride with an ugly sweater contest as part of it. So if you're around this Saturday, that should be really fun. Ocean Park Boulevard businesses have gotten together. They're having their holiday stroll also this Saturday. And then on the far right, is a really fun event that we're looking forward to. The Santa Monica Service Club Alliance has over 25 local nonprofits, and they're going to be promoting a community boutique alternative gift fair at the Santa Monica Bay Women's Club that Buy Local is helping to promote. And just real quickly, the city's role with these events is not only we're helping to promote them, these are all also on our website. The city helped to sponsor several temporary use permits for the sidewalk sales for some of the free events. And we've helped to facilitate over the street banners on Main Street. We have a Buy Local partnership grant, and we've provided in-kind support of staff and volunteering on the weekends for many of these events. We have a social media toolkit that we've given out to all of our businesses to help enable them to promote themselves for the holidays. And we're also promoting on all of our Facebook, our Twitter, and our Instagram. I mentioned the Daily Press is a season guide. We did a spotlight in Seascape. Our partners in the city's communications department did a great blog on the perfect gift guide. And this week we have a digital takeover with Santa Monica Travel and Tourism to promote both our events and the Buy Local events for the holidays and the gift guide. And all of these are really just to help to raise awareness amongst our residents primarily, but also Santa Monica workers and visitors about all the great fun-free things we have here in Santa Monica and what our businesses have to offer. And on that note, I want to thank you all for thinking local first in support of our businesses and our community. It truly makes a difference. Every purchase made in Santa Monica generates revenue directly for our schools and for the city general fund, for affordable housing. And up here on the thing I have is our website, just if everyone goes on buylocalsantamonica.com, and also on our Facebook, we have more information. So with that, thank you.
Any questions? Well, thank you, Ms. Taylor. I actually have one thing. It's not really a question, but I'm going to take this point of privilege. There's a great sign that's been floating around the internet, and I think it's appropriate for what you just presented. And it says, when you buy from a small business, you're not helping a CEO buy a third holiday home. You're helping a little girl get dance lessons, a little boy his team jersey, moms and dads put food on the table. Buy local. So
That's great.
Those, I think, are good words to live by in this holiday season. Thank you very much. We'll move on to the next item. Oh, before we do that, I think the clerk has a question she'd like to ask us all.
Does anyone have anything to report on travel since last week?
Yeah. Right, that was paid by the city. Is that correct, Ms.?
That's correct.
All right, so I think we can move on to the consent calendar then.
Okay, the consent calendar. All items will be considered and approved in one motion unless removed by a council member, and you have 2 requests to speak.
All right, we'll open the public hearing. First, we'll hear from Denise Barton, who is having 2 minutes donated by Olga Zaraska. And Olga, okay, great, thank you. And then after that, Jerry Rubin. Oops, let me turn your mic on, sorry.
Good evening. On this item, I have many questions considering who you put in charge of these funds, such as Barbara Collins taking charge of low and extremely low income housing, as well as workforce or moderate housing. Would this again be a conflict of interest? Understanding that when she worked for the Marin Housing Authority, her being on the board of Marin Workers Housing Trust showed a clearer conflict of interest. But it does leave one to wonder who she and the city are really trying to help. Because in Attachment A, Section X, where the chart included not current information, but only information from 2014 and 2015, so when it's supposed to reflect the last 5 years. Although here in Santa Monica, both low and extremely low income housing and moderate or workforce housing is all considered to be affordable housing, even though they should be separated by monetary funds, and again, shows corruption runs free in the city of Santa Monica. I also have to question the city's hiring of Barbara Collins for her position in control of the housing funds due to Marin County's complaint against her alleging she was unqualified because she lacked working knowledge of federal regulations and didn't understand the difference between project-based housing and the tenant-based Section 8 voucher program and the requisite leasing requirements of each. Barbara Collins was also hired for the executive director of the Marin Housing Authority with no executive search and had no prior hands-on experience with housing management, construction, or maintenance, which can be clearly seen in the case against her by the Golden Gate Village in Marin, which has similarities to what happened in the Village and Mountain View trailer parks. Yet this is who our city thought was competent for her position to torture, take advantage of, and to intimidate affordable housing tenants, as well as who's controlling the funds for affordable housing in the city. And up in Marin, Barbara Collins' problems began to arise when public agencies and private interests commingled activities behind closed doors, exactly like this city does. For example, the city has $800,000 in block grant funding for affordable housing in Santa Monica, of which $500,000 is going to refurbish 14 units of homeless housing in Venice, in return for 3 units when they become available for 3 homeless people from Santa Monica. Or we can look at my building at 1318 2nd Street, where there has been no resident manager since the building opened, which, since there are more than 16 units, a resident manager is required for by city and state law and affordable housing. But doesn't the city on paper have that one exists? More corruption. Security in the building has significantly decreased, maybe 8 hours until 2 a.m., leaving the residents to have to fend for themselves, including affordable housing Section 8 tenants. I also have to question where the money comes from Barbara Collins' Friday department meetings or parties. I've heard them described as both. I asked because Barbara Collins had me fill out and sign a form telling me I would be paid the $450 I had to spend on the environmental inspection at AO Apartments. But since I never received those funds, I have to wonder if it went to one of her Friday events. Also, Section 8 tenants are not informed of the programs available to them either. So where does that money go? You see, there are so many questions. In ending, if you put Barbara Collins together with Pam O'Connor, Tony Vasquez, NMS Properties, and OPCC, all you see is corruption running amok and running a city, and why the city looks more and more like the city of Bell. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barton. Mr. Rubin?
Thank you very, very much. Mayor Pro Tem Davis, council members, city staff, Santa Monicans. I want to wish everyone a happy holiday. And I wanted to speak on just a couple items on the consent calendar. 3A, the agreement for the 3rd Street Promenade fountain enhancements. And I'm assuming that includes the dinosaurs, because they're known all over the country and all over the world, so it's worth the investment to make sure they're really maintained and taken care of. I had a suggestion I just want to throw out, maybe for next year, and when you do the holiday decorations, maybe someone could put some holiday lights around the green dinosaurs and have someone turn it on. I think that would be pretty cool. The other item, the license modification for seasonal ice skating rink to allow the sale of prepared food. How could we not? How could you have that kind of holiday endeavor going on without having some candy canes or holiday cookies or gingerbread or any of those things? So that's seems like a no-brainer too, but I think Santa Monica's really doing great stuff. It's just great to be around here all the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rubin. That closes the public testimony. Does any council member wish to pull any particular item? Seeing
I'll move the consent calendar.
All right, moved by Councilmember O'Connor, seconded by Councilmember Vasquez. May we have a roll call vote, Ms. Anderson-Warren?
Councilmember O'Connor?
Yes.
Councilmember Himmelrich?
Yes.
Councilmember Vasquez?
Yes.
Councilmember McKeown?
Yes.
And Mayor Pro Tem Davis?
Yes, that passes unanimously among the council members present. Great. I think it's become apparent to everyone that we have continued item 6A to a date in the future in January. So that leads us to item 7A, I believe.
Item 7A is introduction and first reading of an ordinance to amend the zoning ordinance making changes, corrections, and clarifications to the zoning ordinance related to policy issues that have arisen since the adoption of the zoning ordinance through its implementation. And you have no request to speak.
All right, we'll have the staff report then.
Good evening, council members. Tonight we continue our review of the zoning ordinance and the need for some changes, corrections, and clarifications since the adoption by the council of the zoning ordinance in 2015. As you may recall, the council has already reviewed some of the more minor clerical changes, corrections, and clarifications and adopted ordinances in May and June of last year, as well as February of this year, adopting those changes. In October of 2017, the Planning Commission reviewed some of the corrections and changes and clarifications that aren't necessarily minor, but they're also not major, but they are necessary changes, corrections, and clarifications, and adopted a resolution recommending to council to make these proposed changes. The Planning Commission had organized the policy issues into 3 groups, or what they endearingly refer to them as buckets. The first bucket was the minor changes, corrections, and clarifications that the council has already adopted. Bucket 2 are the issues that have arisen since the adoption of the ordinance through its implementation. And the third bucket are new policy issues, which we'll get to at a later date. Tonight, the council is reviewing approximately half of the Bucket 2 items, which we're referring to as Bucket 2A. These issues are in the Attachment A. The red lines are in Attachment A and described further in Attachment B. We'll return with the remainder of the Bucket 2 items, or Bucket 2B, at a later date. In Attachment B, we've broken down the policy topics into the purpose of each standard, how the issue was identified, as well as what the proposed clarifying language will do. These issues, in summary, relate to landscaping, parking design standards and bicycle parking, non-conforming alcohol outlets, administrative approvals, development agreement enforcement, the definition of restaurant, and temporary use permits. Staff would also like to note that in the title of the ordinance, there is a typo. There's a reference to accessory dwelling units, which was inadvertently included in the title of the ordinance, and staff will remove that prior to second reading of the ordinance. With that, staff is recommending that the City Council introduce for first reading the ordinance amending the zoning ordinance changes, corrections, and clarifications related to policy issues that have arisen since the adoption of the zoning ordinance through its implementation. Staff is available if you have any more specific questions on any of the proposed red lines.
All right, thank you very much. Do we have any questions from the council? We don't appear to. We don't have any chits, so we don't have any public comment. So the item is now before the council. Councilmember McEwen.
Well, having carefully reviewed what staff provided us and relying also on the expertise and goodwill of our Planning Commission and the actions they took back in October, I will move Bucket 2A. I'll move the staff recommendation on Bucket 2A.
All right, it is.
I don't want to kick the bucket.
I knew that was coming. Someone was going to do that. That was moved by McEwen, seconded by Councilmember Himmelrich. Any discussion? All right, then let's have a vote.
Councilmember Kelm.
Yes.
Councilmember Vasquez.
Yes.
Councilmember Himmelrich.
Yes.
Councilmember O'Connor.
Yes.
And Mayor Pro Tem Davis.
Yes, that passes unanimously among the present council members. Thank you very much.
Next, we have item 7B, introduction for first reading of an interim ordinance, extending interim ordinance 2557, making necessary interim changes to the zoning ordinance to authorize medicinal cannabis retailers and medicinal cannabis light manufacturing within certain zoning districts. And you have one request to speak.
All right, we'll have the staff report.
Good evening, council members. It's nice to be back. Thank you.
Long time no see.
The next item before you is an extension of interim ordinance 2557, dealing with medicinal cannabis. Some background: on October 24th, the council adopted the initial interim ordinance to authorize medicinal cannabis retailers and medicinal cannabis light manufacturing in certain zoning districts. That interim ordinance is set to expire on January 23rd of 2018. The proposed interim ordinance would extend the term until April of 2020, which is approximately a 27-month extension. Prior to the expiration of this extended ordinance, staff will begin the selection process for medicinal dispensaries with a request for applications, which is scheduled to be posted within 2 to 3 weeks. We will continue to conduct more comprehensive review and community engagement with the Planning Commission before returning to the council with a more permanent solution for the adult use of cannabis. We will continue to monitor further changes in state law, which we fully expect, and we will continue to examine implementation of regulations in other jurisdictions. So with that, staff is recommending that the council introduce for first reading the ordinance to extend interim zoning ordinance 2557.
All right, thank you very much. Do we have any questions for staff? No? Then we'll open the public hearing. We have one speaker, Harvey Eder.
Good evening, council. I'm Harvey Eder, and I'm speaking on this because I'd like to see Santa Monica consider and actually do what the city of LA is doing in terms of those that have suffered under the cannabis laws as they've existed since the 30s when they got rid of alcohol. I mean, and when they brought alcohol back and got rid of marijuana, and I think it'd be a good thing. I think they're talking at least one permit from people that have had. I'm not sure exactly how they're describing it. It's in today's paper and in yesterday's Sunday's paper, and I incorporated it into the record here by reference. And I think it's a good thing, and it does apply to me. I did not smoke marijuana for 30 years, but I got hurt working. I worked on the oil pipeline in Alaska. I busted up my neck and back, etc. And so I used medical marijuana. I was arrested almost 50 years ago at the University of California in Santa Barbara in 1968. It was a felony for possession. And that's still on my record, and I'm trying to get it expunged. And I was actually kicked out of the university and set up to go to NAM and etc. It's a long story, and I think that these things should be considered and in the law here in Santa Monica. Are folks familiar with this issue? Okay. That's basically it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Eder.
Okay, thanks.
All right, do we have, that closes the public hearing. Do we have any discussion on the item? Councilmember Himmelrich?
Sorry. I'm going to move, unless you want to discuss something, Kevin. I'm going to move that we introduce for first reading an interim zoning ordinance extending interim zoning ordinance 2557 to April 20, 2020.
All right.
I will second that, and I'd just like to add that the issue that was raised by a member of the public is one I'm very aware of and interested in, but it's not what we have agendized before us tonight, so we'll have to hold that until we actually do set up the permit system.
All right, that motion was made by Himmelrich, seconded by McEwen. May we have a roll call vote?
Councilmember O'Connor?
Yes.
Councilmember Himmelrich?
Yes.
Councilmember Vasquez?
Yes.
Councilmember McKeown?
Yes.
And Mayor Pro Tem Davis?
Yes, that passes unanimously among the council members present. Thank you.
Next, we have item 7C, introduction and first reading of an ordinance to join Los Angeles Community Choice Energy, appoint a director and an alternate to LACCE Board, and request regular updates from staff. And you have one request to speak.
All right, thank you. We'll have the staff report.
How are you doing? Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and council members. My name is Garrett Wong, and I work for the Office of Sustainability and the Environment. Tonight, we are discussing what we call community choice energy or community choice aggregation. Just to recap for those who are not familiar, what is community choice, or what is community choice energy or community choice aggregation, CCE or CCA as it's known. It's an opportunity for local governments to essentially aggregate the electrical demand of their community, the utility ratepayers, both commercial and residential, and procure and sell electrical power directly to the customers. So what we're talking about is the local government being able to become a part of the energy utility business. The way that this works is that the local government is responsible for determining what the source of power supply is, which means that local governments can specify greener sources of power. The incumbent utility, for this case, it's Southern California Edison, still remains. They are responsible for conveying the power directly to the customers. They're responsible for maintaining the utility grid and for maintaining grid reliability and stability. Ultimately, the customers will experience no tangible difference when they turn on their power at home or at their business. When they turn on the lights, it still works. They still get one singular utility bill from their existing utility, except now the CCA is a sub-item in the total, and the CCA rate dollars come back to the local government. So why would a local government want to participate in community choice aggregation or community choice energy? Well, for one reason, it offers the opportunity for local governments to increase the use of renewable energy. It can potentially lower costs for residents and commercial customers. It allows the community to become more influential when it comes to reducing carbon emissions by reducing the emissions associated with electricity production. It can support local economic development by the fact that local dollars are kept locally and then can be reinvested locally. When these dollars are also returned back to the community, it also offers the opportunity to look at other opportunities to expand electrification of other building systems or the transportation sector, which are also responsible for greenhouse gas emissions. So this city in particular looked at several options to implement CCA. CCA in California has largely been done in concert with other cities through the form of Joint Powers Authority. And there currently is one active single city CCA, which is the city of Lancaster. And the city of Lancaster is now offering its services through its own Joint Powers Authority, known as California Choice Energy Authority, to other cities who might be interested in setting up CCA for themselves as a single city. And the city itself could, on its own, solicit services from third-party service providers to implement CCA on its own if it so chooses to do so. So just to give you a brief overview of the options that were considered, first and foremost is the LA County Choice Energy or LA Community Choice Energy, which we will be referring to as LACE. Then is South Bay Clean Power, SBCP, and then the single city option. To give you a sense of comparison and a little sense of history, South Bay Clean Power was the first effort in Southern California to seriously consider CCA. The city had signed a resolution to explore CCA with several other West Side cities and South Bay cities. And then South Bay Clean Power which at that point was still only an initiative or movement, approached the County of Los Angeles and encouraged the County of Los Angeles to take up a county-wide feasibility study and to look into implementing CCA for the entire county. This city of Santa Monica also received an unsolicited proposal from Lancaster CCEA to consider its option as a single city and move forward that way. When cities join JPAs, they're able to shield themselves from financial risk, from liability, from the administrative burden that is typically required from implementing CCA. It takes a lot of capital dollars, it takes a lot of technical staff, and it takes a lot of regulatory advocacy with the Public Utilities Commission. So if the city were to be a part of a JPA, either with LACE or the Southway Clean Power, that burden would largely be outsourced to the JPA staff and the JPA board. If the city were to explore a single city option, it would have to hire out those services. Lancaster is offering those services for a fee, and you can see the fees listed there. When it comes to being a part of a JPA, obviously Santa Monica's autonomy is limited, but it can also be offset by the sheer size of the JPA. When it comes to LACE and South Bay Clean Power, it is a one city, one vote. However, there are options to incur a weighted vote if there are issues that cannot be decided on unanimously. When it comes to being our own CCA, if Lancaster or CCEA were to serve the city, City Council would be directly responsible for establishing procurement goals, rates, and energy programs that would follow after implementing utility service. However, CCEA would be responsible for the contracts, they would be responsible for procurement and also administration of the actual operation. If the city were to implement CCA on its own, without the help of CCEA, City Council would bear all the responsibility in terms of the direction, the administration, and the financing, and the oversight. In terms of costs, again, I mentioned that JPAs help reduce the burden that individual members would have to bear. LA County has offered to seed the CCA on the order of $10 million in order to secure a loan from the private sector. This is money that the county is offering up that removes the need for any single city to offer up any collateral in order to start operations. For South Bay Clean Power, the proposal to initiate service required what was called a guarantee from a founding member city or two founding member cities. And this gave some pause to cities who were potentially considering joining South Bay Clean Power. When it comes to the single city option, obviously the city would bear the full brunt of the costs when it comes to any startup capital and any operating costs that would be incurred. There are options with third-party service providers to work what's called at risk, meaning that the third-party service providers do not necessarily receive any financial benefit until they have successfully launched a CCA on your behalf. To give you a sense of timing, this is what has transpired over the series over the past year or so, couple years. We've seen LACE release its plans for its business plan, its implementation plan. LACE intends to serve all county municipal accounts in early of 2018. Its next goal is to serve unincorporated utility customers along with member cities only in the commercial and industrial sector. And then by the end of 2018, or perhaps in early 19, it would serve all unincorporated county and member city residential customers. South Bay Clean Power had also released its own business plan and financial analysis and had proposed similar phased launches. CCEA had presented to the city its own feasibility study and implementation plan and proposed essentially a full launch for the whole entire city of Santa Monica. City staff had commissioned UCLA Luskin Center to perform a comparative study of all the various options that were before the city, as well as to provide some information to the other cities who were considering joining LACE or South Bay Clean Power at the time. And some of UCLA's key findings are embedded into the staff report as well as this report. So when it comes to South Bay Clean Power, there was concern over the financial liability and risk. As I mentioned, there was a financial guarantee that 1 or 2 cities would have to bear. And amongst the cities, there was no strong interest to bear that cost. There has been no concerted effort amongst cities to come together to join South Bay Clean Power. So staff do not recommend any further action when it comes to South Bay Clean Power. With regards to the single city option, again, I've mentioned the costs and benefits of implementing the single city option. The UCLA has identified the fact that although the city would have control over procurement and rates and energy programs, the city would not have direct control over contracts and administration, which should not directly in turn contribute to any local programs or local benefit in that matter. So at this time, staff do not recommend any further action. LACE is currently poised to become the largest CCA in California, which means a lot. Size equals strength in the energy utility business. You are able to aggregate a large pool of demand that you can go out to the market and procure energy. You're able to reduce your administrative costs, and you're able to ensure that you have a strong financial reserve in order to help weather the market and regulatory changes that may take place over time. LACE is the clear and present option that is readily available to the city, and this staff recommends joining LACE and advocating for Santa Monica's interests, which we will talk about next. So the Task Force on the Environment has presided over this issue over the past 2 years, and we've also had a subcommittee form which focused very specifically on the subject and has closely monitored the latest activities of the LACE board and LACE staff. And the task force has adopted a list of recommendations that they would like the city to essentially establish as requirements for its continued membership to be a part of LACE. So among those include ensuring that no energy comes from coal or nuclear, that by 2030 that we're at least to ensure that we have 100% renewable energy for the entire city, that 20% of the energy that is procured comes from local energy sources, that the CCA comply with other state energy goals, such as achieving 50% energy efficiency in existing buildings by 2030. And then also that the structure of the CCA itself should be set up in a way to support advanced energy concepts and programs like distributed energy resources. Revenue should also be directed to support electric vehicle charging, which directly supports the Electric Vehicle Action Plan that Council had adopted a couple weeks prior. The recommendations are continued. They want to ensure that LACE implements efficiency and conservation programs, utilizes smart meters and smart user interfaces when it comes to dealing with our customers, and that the city should be able to take advantage of potential revenue surpluses that are generated by our own customers and direct those directly to our own sustainable energy projects. They recommend utilizing what's called distributed energy resources aggregation to essentially create what are called virtual power plants. So that's either using programs or cloud-based controls to communicate virtually to things like thermostats, to energy storage devices, or to any other electric load that can help reduce the electrical demand on the utility grid at any one time. We also recommend that the CCA utilize data and billing services that support that effort, meaning using real-time data and not average data or historical data that's not current. We also recommend that the CCA move as soon as possible to form its Community Advisory Committee and invest in renewable energy in Southern California. So before this council tonight are the recommended actions, the first of which is to introduce the first reading of the ordinance, which approves the JPA. The second of which would be authorizing the city manager to take the necessary actions to execute the documents to join LACE. And then the city council needs to designate one board director and 2 alternates to represent Santa Monica as the board of directors of LACE. And then we're asking that council direct staff to provide regular updates on the latest activity of LACE and to continue to evaluate CCA options going forward. When it comes to board representation with LACE, there are certain requirements of who can be designated. The board director should be an elected. The alternates may be unelected, or it may be staff, or it may even include a community member with sufficient technical expertise. The task force recommends that David Pettit, who is a task force member and who works for NRDC, to serve as an alternate. The reason why we're bringing this to you tonight, and the reason why we have a second reading of the ordinance next week, is because LACE has enacted a deadline to join. That deadline started almost 180 days ago when the first member city joined, and LACE had initiated a deadline to encourage other cities to join to become a part of their initial launch phase, so they wouldn't necessarily have to incur additional costs for adding members incrementally over time. And they wanted to make sure that they had a critical mass of members to make decisions that were going to be formative for the future of LACE. So this Thursday, staff are hoping that the designated board director will be able to attend LACE's last board meeting of 2018 and the LACE board meetings in early 2018 in order to ensure that Santa Monica's goals are clear and present during the discussions, and that the environmental goals, the technical requirements to meet those goals are enshrined in the structure of LACE as it proceeds to launch across the county and in Santa Monica. We would also want to make sure that we continually monitor the decisions that are being made at LACE to ensure that the city's needs are met, and if they're not, then staff would look to recommend what alternatives the city has if it determines that LACE does not serve its needs. Let's see. And then we also will look to work with LACE staff to support the successful launch and outreach when it comes to starting electrical service starting in mid-year 2018 and into late 2018. So with that, that ends the presentation, but I'll leave it on the slide for the recommended actions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wong. We have some questions. Councilmember Vasquez.
You know, now LACE, I'm assuming, is the one that's tied into Lancaster. Is that it? Is that correct?
No, LACE is the one that was anchored by the LA County, and so now there's.
So is the LA County one that gives us the autonomy?
No,
it doesn't.
No, we are joined with other members in a joint powers authority. So
there's a weighted vote on that one.
And we're one member, one vote, unless multiple members call for a weighted vote. So typically, Within the JPA structure, as it has been with most other CCAs in California, weighted votes are typically not deferred to because everything typically is decided unanimously. Everything's typically worked out in committee before it's brought to vote. Weighted vote only comes into play when there are certain items that obviously members are not pleased with, and they would rather try and take advantage of a weighted vote to have a different outcome. And so when it comes to LACE, it is essentially anchored by the county, but they also have one vote. If it comes to a weighted vote, they have the lion's share of electrical load, so they have a greater power in that situation. But there are a number of cities who were at one point considering South Bay Clean Power who are now have joined or are joining LACE, who are aligned with Santa Monica and in terms of its environmental goals. And we believe that we can work in collaboration with these other cities to ensure that the environmental agenda is strong.
In your analysis, when you were looking at the different groups, you mentioned in one of the slides all the different groups, so LACE and a few others in there. I noticed you didn't look, or I don't know if you did look at, but you didn't mention there the one out in Pico Rivera. I think it's called Prime or something.
Right. So Pico Rivera is a city that has joined what's called California Choice Energy Authority, and that is another joint powers authority. That joint powers authority is anchored by the city of Lancaster, and the city of Lancaster serves as the board of that CCA. So Lancaster is essentially offering its administrative services through a JPA to other cities who want to establish their own single city CCAs. So they're offering these services at cost. When you become a member of this JPA, you essentially have no vote because it's just the Council of Lancaster making those decisions. But the local decisions that the city would enjoy would be setting procurement targets, setting rates for ratepayers, and then deciding what it wants to do with the revenue that's collected from the ratepayers. But again, there's the bifurcation of roles and responsibilities between the City of Lancaster and the Joint Powers Authority and what the city would have responsibility over.
But I thought it was my understanding in looking into that it actually gives you the autonomy that we probably would want, no?
That is one of the benefits of doing that, yes.
Because at the end of the day, I think it's all about, like you mentioned earlier in your presentation, being able to advocate and obviously procure more of the electric vehicles, for example, and other measures that we can put in place to actually expedite the overall goal here.
That's correct.
Whereas when you belong to somebody like a LACE or one of these other groups, you really don't have the autonomy, do you?
We have less autonomy,
right.
But again, I think one of the other considerations outside of the autonomy, I think, is the global environmental impact as well as the administration of the organization itself. And so when you think of the global environmental impact, Santa Monica is, a small portion of the county, and of the members who comprise LACE at this point, we're a fraction compared to what the aggregate demand of the county is at this point right now with its current members. So even if the city were to be 100% electricity, renewable electricity tomorrow, and let's say LACE selected 50% for all of its members, the global impact of LACE would still be much larger than that of Santa Monica going it alone. And then there is just the administration of implementing a single city CCA that the staff has not yet fully estimated and fully appreciated, but it does take a significant amount of lift to start up our own electric utility.
Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Himmelrich.
So my First question is for the city attorney, and what I wonder is how we're able to enact an ordinance in such short order. Usually we have the original ordinance and then a 30-day lapse before the second reading, and then it's 30 days before it becomes effective.
That will still be true in this case. However, the difference here is that it's the LACCE organization that is willing to vote on our entry into the JPA with a first reading, even though we will still have an ordinance which has to have a second reading and a 30-day referendum period. But for purposes of joining the JPA, my understanding is they're willing to take a vote to admit us, which would then allow us to at least participate in decisions, recognizing that there's always a possible risk of a challenge, but it's a risk, and the offset to that risk is that if we don't meet the deadline, then there's possibly an entry fee, which I don't think they've calculated the amount, but they set it up so people would have an incentive of joining earlier rather than later so that they could commence the program.
So I read that in the materials, and I understand that there are other cities that are going in after first reading only. But I guess what confuses me is you say in 7 days we're going to have a second reading? Is that right?
December 12th?
Yes, December at the regular meeting, yes.
And so it doesn't require 30 days between first reading and second reading?
Correct.
Okay, good. Thank you. So I did want to understand that. Now, the requirements, the recommendation of all of those many recommendations of the task force, my question is, do we anticipate pushback? Do we anticipate resistance regarding what the recommendations are? And I wanted to ask it this way because I didn't want to go through every one. What I want to know is if there are certain conditions that they think we should impose that may turn out to be problematic.
That's a great question. From what we've observed of the past few LACE board meetings is that there has not been a lot of robust discussion, or I'll say oversight even, when it comes to some of the staff proposals and recommendations that are passing before them. And that's one of the reasons why, the city, amongst with other cities who have been slow into joining LACE, have been a little bit concerned about the direction that it's been going. But the encouragement of the county and of the staff there has always been, you need to join LACE so that way you can shape it.
So we can be better? Is that the route?
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
So we'll be so much better if you're here. Yeah,
right.
Got it.
Yeah. So I think it'll take some education, but I think if we come in clear with our demands and our interests, knowing what we are talking about, I think it'll be more challenging for people to argue otherwise.
And LA County must have its own representative from the City Council, yes?
That is as Supervisor Kuehl at this point. I don't know who their alternates are.
Thank you. Those are my questions for the moment.
All right. Councilmember O'Connor.
When are the board meetings and how long have they been meeting?
The board meetings are typically the first Thursday or Friday of the month. And the meetings have, I think, lasted somewhere between 2 to 3 hours. I think the next few meetings will be a bit longer and more involved, just because there are a lot of significant decisions that will be made for the launch of the program.
And who staffs it from the county? Which officer?
Gary Giroux, he's the Chief Sustainability Officer at the county. And he has a few staff who are working at, and they're currently in the process of hiring interim staff for LACE. So the county is trying to slowly back out of its role, its administrative role, and it's slowly turning that over to LACE.
And what time on Thursdays are their meetings?
They usually start in the early afternoon, so 1 o'clock.
Got it. Thanks.
Is this one.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wong. I think we'll now hear from the public. We have one request to speak, Harvey Etter.
Hello again. I'm for the city joining LACE, but I think in light of the new information on carbon dioxide equivalent emissions, the best science that is used in the 2016 air quality plan of the district. Chapter 10.2 says there's been over a 30% increase in methane, natural gas, over the last 12 years. That bring, instead of the 450 parts per million CO2 equivalent that carbon the state used, that we're at 750 now, not in 2050 or 2100. And that the cities and the counties' climate action plan, the scoping plan for the air board, etc., they've all got to use the best science. And these are new numbers, and they've got to be used, and we have to convert to solar renewables as quickly as possible. Solar has come down 70-80% in the last 5-6 years. And it's cost effective. It should be done now. We need to have it. We're involved with litigation for immediate total solar conversion. There's state laws to use the best available control technology, and this is it. Life cycle cost effectiveness. We have a solar New Deal and about 60 exhibits in the plan, and anyway, so we should take a hard line and bring others with us.
Thank you, Mr. Etter. That closes the public hearing. The matter is now before the council. Councilmember McEwen.
Well, Council, I didn't have any questions for staff on their presentation because at your direction back in February, for the past 10 months, I've been working with staff on generating that recommendation with, I have to say, just amazing hard work from staff members, Dean Kubani, Garrett Wong. Is that Ariana Vito in the back of the room? Our finance director, because we were evaluating the financial impacts of this. We also had remarkable assistance from a resident of our city named Amy Butte, who was extremely knowledgeable and helpful in our evaluating these options. And one of the people who had worked on this issue for a long time, a gentleman named Samuel Golding. So a lot of expertise went into what's before you. Yes, we evaluated the balances, the trade-offs between going our own way and having total autonomy and leading the region, which I think is Santa Monica's role, is to lead the region. This is a very timely opportunity in front of us. You know, the Trump administration is trying to elevate the nation's fossil fuel consumption, and it got a big boost with the tax bill in the Senate just this past weekend, which weakened investment incentives for solar and wind. We as a city now have the chance to go renewable with our electricity and also to feed our electric vehicles renewable electricity. We have a history here. I mean, the building we're sitting in right now, the lights that we're sitting under, the electricity that's running the sound system is all 100% renewable. The city of Santa Monica has been using 100% renewable electricity since 1999. For all of our city facilities. And for a while there, it was possible for residents like me to get renewable electricity too. And I used to buy it from a company called Commonwealth America. But the state changed the rules. It became financially impossible for individuals to do that. So we, as residents of the city, haven't had the opportunity to choose more green energy than we're getting from the investor-owned utility, Southern California Edison. By moving forward tonight, what this council enables is for every Santa Monican to make the choice not to kill our planet. when they turn on the lights. And I think that that is something that the majority of Santa Monicans very much want to have as an option for them. We have chosen the option that gives us the ideal mix of leadership, autonomy, price, security. We have looked at what the long-term risks are, because we don't know how the rules may change in the future. The California Public Utilities Commission, for instance, may require CCAs to pay more or less of the cost of the previous investments made by the investor-owned utilities when they thought they had a lock on us as customers forever. So we have chosen to go with the county because the size of the county, the expertise, the staffing the county provides are all important, but also because as members of the county CCA, we will get to affect what happens for all of Southern California on this very important issue. I spoke with our supervisor, Sheila Kuehl, about this on Sunday, and she, as a Santa Monica resident, is very excited at the idea that we will join their Joint Powers Agreement group. On that board, we will have allies. We're hoping to form a Green Caucus of like-minded cities, some of whom I already know are represented by people that I've worked with on environmental issues in the past and I can attest to. I think we can have a tremendous influence by joining the county that we wouldn't have with any other option. And we also, by joining the county, reduce the amount of money we have to put in up front. We help to assure that the risk in the long term is as small as possible. And we know that the residents of Santa Monica will be well served by a regional system that won't have the ups and downs and the short-term fluctuations that a smaller system can have. The county, with whom we'll be buying electricity if we join the JPA, has a tremendous electrical load and therefore tremendous buying power. And with a properly managed portfolio, I am hopeful that we'll be able to offer our Santa Monica residents at least probably three choices. One will be power dirt cheap. And I hope nobody chooses that, because that would just be at the same level of renewability that Edison provides. I think we can, I can almost assure you that we'll be able to provide 100% renewable energy at a very modest increase of cost, and we'll be able to provide cleaner energy than Southern California Edison does at a savings from what SCE chooses. So this is a win every which way for everybody involved if we do go ahead with this. I don't know what other council members want to share. We didn't really ask any questions after we heard from staff. It didn't seem there were any. But I'll go ahead and move the staff recommendation that we introduce on first reading the ordinance approving the county JPA.
All right. Well, I'm actually informed by staff that we can combine bullet items 1, 2, and 4 there into one motion.
I shall do so.
All right. So is that also okay with the seconder? All right, so moved by Councilmember McEwen, seconded by Councilmember O'Connor. Councilmember Himmelrich is in the queue.
Well, first of all, I did ask questions, so I
meant after we heard from the public. We often go back and ask a second round of questions.
With respect to who, I understand that there is a recommendation as to one of the alternates from the task.
Well, that's not part of this motion.
This motion is on bullets.
This is on bullets 1, 2, and 4.
Well, except that I plugged in, right? So Kevin started, but after we heard from the public, I think I pushed my button so I could ask this question, but I'm happy to wait till later.
Well, I mean, if it's on bullet item 3, let's wait. Let's just discuss 1, 2, and 4, and then we can discuss bullet item 3.
I don't have.
All right. Any other questions or comments? All right. Let's have a vote. And this is a vote on bullet items 1, 2, and 3, which is introduced for first reading.
1, 2, and 4.
1, 2, and 4. I'm sorry. I'm confusing myself now. Introduced for first reading, the ordinance approving the LACE JPA authorize the city manager to execute necessary documents to join LACE and direct staff to provide regular updates.
Councilmember Kim?
Yes.
Councilmember Vasquez?
Yes.
Councilmember Himmelrich?
Yes.
Councilmember O'Connor?
Yes.
And Mayor Pro Tem Davis?
Yes. All right, Councilmember Himmelrich, I'll bet you have something to say.
Yeah, so I understand there's a recommendation from the Task Force on the Environment to appoint David Pettit to one of the alternates. One of us needs to be one of the people who is the director. With respect to the second alternate, is there any general guideline or any recommendation from staff as to what? And I think I have two questions. One, is there any recommendation from staff? And two, should we have a staff member as one of our alternates? Because it was my understanding of the requirements of the alternates that at least one of them be an expert in this. And so I'm guessing that would be one of you, right?
I think we have a few of those.
Sure. So we don't have any specific recommendations on who the board representatives and alternates should be. On staff, we do have, I would make a recommendation that if you wanted to appoint a staff member, we do have several staff members who could attend these meetings as an alternate and are very fluent in how CCAs work and can provide not only direction at the meetings, but also assistance to the designated board member. So I would recommend that you, if you were to designate a staff member, you would designate the city manager or his or her designee, and that would allow some flexibility in who that staff member would be.
So it wouldn't be you or your designee.
Right.
That was a joke. Okay, thank you. That's what I wanted to know.
All right, Councilmember O'Connor.
Well, I'm interested, but I think Councilmember McEwen is probably also interested in being the board member. Is that correct?
Having done the work on behalf of the council for the past 10 months, I'd be very interested in being
Right.
the director.
So I'd be interested in being an alternate. That being said, to address Councilmember Himmelrich's question and other boards that we've been on, the staff would be there to attend and to provide technical assistance to the board member and alternates, including Mr. Pettit, who has expertise himself, but still hopefully would be interested in hearing what the staff folks would provide. So I don't know if anybody else is interested, but I'm leaning towards suggesting you would be the director and I'd be an alternate. I don't know if anyone else is interested in the alternate.
All right, any other comments?
Yes. I mentioned somebody who had been extraordinarily helpful to us in coming up with this recommendation, and she wasn't in the room at the time, but she is now. Amy Butte, thank you so much for the work you did.
All right, well, seeing no other comments, I will make a motion that we appoint Councilmember McEwen to be the director to LACE, and that our designated alternates be Councilmember O'Connor and David Pettit from the Environmental Task Force, with support, as always, and on a regular ongoing basis from the staff. All right, motion by Mayor Pro Tem Davis, seconded by Councilmember Vasquez. Any other comments? All right, let's have a vote. Ms. Anderson-Warren?
Councilmember O'Connor?
Yes.
Councilmember Himmelrich?
Yes.
Councilmember Vasquez?
Yes.
Councilmember McKeown?
Yes.
And Mayor Pro Tem Davis?
Yes, that passes unanimously of the 5 of us currently present.
Next, we have item 8A, Strategy for Long-Term Economic Stability, and you have 3 requests to speak.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and council members. I'm Andy Agel, the Director of Housing and Economic Development. Before you is consideration of the first step in developing a long-term economic sustainability strategy. By way of background, on September 26, just a couple months ago, Council had held a study session to consider whether to develop a strategy to address long-term sustainability of Santa Monica's economy. The need for a strategic plan has been prompted by disruptive changes in technology and the global economy that have the potential to make our economy look very different in the future. At the meeting, the City Council was unanimous in their support for developing a long-term strategy and provided direction on how the city could approach the development of such a strategy. Over the past few weeks since the study session, we've convened an internal working group with staff from Finance, Planning and Community Development, the City Manager's Office, and Housing and Economic Development. We've also begun initial exploratory discussions with some of our economic partners who expressed interest in being a part of the effort. We've also conducted initial research, and to give you an overview of the research to date, I'd like to invite Julie Wettig to the podium. Though before I do that, I'd like to actually introduce Julie. So as you may recall, as part of the current budget, you included funding for a pilot management fellowship program. The idea of developing a management fellowship program actually arose out of an interdepartmental working group that was looking at the issue of succession planning. I think, as you all know, it's a big issue for all levels of government, including our own city, that a large portion of our workforce is eligible for retirement today and the next few years. And management fellowship programs are ways to bring young professionals into the city, integrate them to the city, and hopefully develop future leaders for Santa Monica. So we had over 200 applicants to be part of our management fellowship program. We invited 8 of them to spend a day in an assessment center where they had to do writing exercises, collaborative exercises. They did oral presentations. They did financial exercises, and they also had to go through oral interviews. And at the end of the day, Julie rose to the top of the heap, and we're very grateful that she agreed to join us. She recently completed her master's degree at the Luskin School of Public Affairs at UCLA, and she and her husband live in Santa Monica. So she's already very familiar with us, and in fact, she spent last summer between the first and second year working with Garrett in the Office of Sustainability and Environment. So she's got a good sense of Santa Monica. So she just started with us in October. Her first 6-month assignment is in the city manager's office, and part of her responsibilities include the economic sustainability strategy. So with that, I'd like to invite Julie up.
Thanks, Mr. Eagle.
Well, welcome, Ms. Wettig. We're glad to have you with us.
Thank you so much. So glad to be here. So to provide a local context for our futuristic research, we've been inventorying economic information documented in the city's plans and strategies from the last decade, along with regional economic data and forecasting from external reports. Our long-term and forward-thinking research so far can be split into 2 categories. Number 1, futuristic predictions, which include reports on how global trends and the exponential growth of particular technologies will affect cities. And 2, innovative urban approaches, which include ways cities and institutions are planning for future changes. There's a wealth of information on how global and technological disruptions are expected to fundamentally change how we live, move, and do business in coming decades. There's also considerable information on how particular disruptive changes may individually affect cities, plus some examples of how cities are creating resiliency plans. However, we haven't yet identified examples of cities that have analyzed and anticipated the interaction of these predicted seismic changes and how they will affect how the economy operates and thrives in the long term. So this ultimately suggests to us that there isn't necessarily a playbook for what we are endeavoring to do.
So as Julie's research has identified, the lack of an established process for developing a strategy for long-term economic sustainability means that we have an opportunity to develop our own course. Given that the scope of the effort could be overwhelming, we recommend that we use the initial phase of the process as what I'll call an open phase, where we gather ideas and insights that allow us to identify and prioritize the key opportunities and threats related to Santa Monica's economic future. Once we've established priorities, the next phase would involve developing a framework for addressing the opportunities and threats to help ensure the long-term livelihood of our economy. More specifically, during this first phase, we propose to continue our research while convening discussions among panels of experts to present and debate the opportunities and threats we face. While the proposed open phase could take a variety of forms, staff is drawn to the panel format because It allows the experts to engage with each other, likely finding areas of consensus as well as areas of disagreement to further our understanding of the issues. We think the panel format would also allow us to partner with other local organizations, potentially as part of existing events and forums, in order to further our common knowledge base. With Council's concurrence, we plan to spend the next several months looking for opportunities to support the open discussion of our future economy. We hope the Council members will be active participants in the panel discussions as we plan to return to you for direction on priorities and strategies before we embark upon the next phase of the process. That concludes the staff report, and we're available for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Eagle. Do we have any questions? No. Then we'll open the public comment. And Ms. Anderson, why not just make it clear we have 2 requests to speak, right? All right. Our first speaker is Jerry Rubin, and our second speaker is Sean Landris.
Well, thank you again very, very much, Mayor Pro Tem Davis and council members. Well, even though there's no playbook written on this, I think it's a good thing that we're doing this. Very commendable and very important. I think we owe a big gratitude to all of our city staff over the years and decades that managed to get us to be this great city that's maintained a AAA bond rating, promoted sustainability, given to social service endeavors, the arts, the schools, continues to have a great process that invites feedback from the community, like these panels will do. So we go forward with this not so much with any trepidation at all, with an optimistic viewpoint, and hope that there is a real coming together. We need to be unified. We have to understand that development is not an enemy in our city, and it's going to be important for economic growth. So I just put this out here, that this is a very forward-thinking thing, and it's really commendable to hear we're involved in this. So as far as the new leaders that are coming up, my recommendation would be to welcome that, but also ask the people who are thinking of retiring now maybe to stick around for another year or 2 if they could, because we need you, and you've been great for the city. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Rubin. Mr. Landris?
Good evening, Council. My name is Sean Landris, and I'm here as a longtime Santa Monica resident who certainly has seen the changes economically and socially and in many ways since I grew up here. This is an important effort, and I think it's really exciting to be considering this at the beginning of an open process that is really asking some core questions. But it's also important that we be mindful that a sustainable economic future ultimately is about people, especially the people who live here. And so I would ask that as you consider this item, that you consider giving staff some direction, in particular to identify ways to sustain and enhance Santa Monica voters' historic commitments to supporting public education and housing, particularly since propositions Y and YY and GS and GSH are sales tax based, and we're looking at a decline in the sales tax base, and that we look for ways creatively and through this process to try to mitigate and minimize the disruptions and impact of change, both cultural and economic, for longtime Santa Monica residents, particularly those who are aging, who are, as you know, facing residential displacement, but also commercial displacement and mobility barriers. And so I hope that as you look to the well-being framework that you've adopted for the budget, you'd also consider including specific reference to guide the staff that our city's strategic goal of inclusion and diversity be incorporated into thinking, and that the futurists who are invited be asked to consider those values and strategies. Thank you, and I look forward to participating in this process.
Thank you, Mr. Landris. Council, we have one late chit. All in favor? Aye. All right. For 1 minute, Harvey Etter.
All right, real quickly, in today's paper, incorporating by reference article about melting sea ice effect on drought, that our drought was the worst in 1,200 years. The ice caps melting. There was 60, 70 degrees difference, increase in temperature last December in the Arctic. The weather changes means that there's going to be, in 20 to 30 years, no ice in the Arctic. And there's going to be a 10 to 15% increase, decrease in rain. So that's the situation. It's a lot worse than we thought. And any kind of future planning is going to take this into effect, and as well as energy democracy. This is a new book out, Advancing Equity and Clean Energy Solutions. I know this one fellow, Al Weinreb, has been working with the Sierra Club on this and whatnot. It was a meeting a couple weeks ago. I want to incorporate this into the record.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Etter. The public hearing is now closed. The matter is before the council. Councilmember Himmelrich.
So I have a couple questions. Specifically, I like the idea of panel discussions. I like the idea of incorporating other organizations. I think that should be as broad as possible. And, you talk specifically about our sort of tried and true city groups. I think maybe we ought to be looking at organizations that are, as I always say, not the usual suspects. I think that there are groups who are organizing forums that may not be Santa Monica based. We live in a big area, in a big state. That said, I see these alternatives. I see the council subcommittees. I think that we are interested in being involved in this. And I wonder how we'll be involved. I mean, other than having access to the materials, how we can develop a greater insight so that we can be greater contributors and have a better basis to determine what the framework ought to be.
So a couple of thoughts there. First is we really do hope you're actually being a part of these panels, being a part of what's going on. That whether we go to subcommittees or whatever it may be, I think that is going to be a critical consideration after this open phase, because that's really going to be about how do we take all this knowledge and actually start to build a framework. And I think that may be where you may say, we think these are three critical issues and would like to have subcommittees or do something on those lines to delve more deeply into those.
Well, and I sort of understood that part of it, I think, but I guess what I'm having a little trouble with in terms of this is it seems so amorphous. And so I guess and I understand it's supposed to be futuristic and open-ended, et cetera, but we've heard people talking about housing and talking about, environmental sustainability. I mean, these are all things we work on all the time. This is different, I think. I mean,
it's different, though you recall at the broadest level, what we're trying to do is develop a strategy so our future economy reflects our values. And certainly the things that were discussed tonight, the things that you discussed at your study session was about how do we define our future versus having it defined for us. And if it's defined by corporate X or corporate Y, we potentially lose that ability to make sure that we've got an economy that reflects what's important in Santa Monica. But I think you're right. This is something different. This is about how do we look at our economy in a different way, but also make sure that it reflects those values.
And I guess what I'm saying is there a way to divide up the topic of our economy in a way, even at the inception, that it is able to be put into a couple of broad categories. I mean, we could talk about macroeconomics or micro. I mean, all of your standard. You go to business school, you get this, right? I mean, there are different ways of looking at it, you know, and different approaches to it. And look, this was not my major, you know, and it's not, you know, but we live in this world, and I just wonder if there are ways. Again, to have broad categories that we can be working within.
So we could conceivably at this point say, let's frame what the issues we're going to tackle are. The reason we're coming to you at a fairly broad approach is I don't think we're at a point that we could say, let's take discussion of this off the table or this on the table. We think we need to have some of that dialogue now to help us then figure out, all right, what are actually the things we want to make sure are on the table and are front and center.
And I hear that, but I'm want to, and you know, and seriously, I'm not dissing you guys, but if I had an economist, standing in front of me talking about this, would they say to me, I think we ought to be looking, if you want to really look at how you can move forward, you have these broad areas that you need to look at in terms of your success.
So absolutely. So an economist, we would get one here who would say that, and then the next week would bring another economist who would likely say the opposite thing, which in many ways is what led us to say, let's have panels, let's have the one who says, whatever, autonomous vehicles is the most important economic issue you're facing, and the one who comes the next week and says internet retailing, and actually have them, excuse my term, but battle it out a little bit. And that's to our benefit.
Well, no, but when I'm talking about this, I mean, look, we understand about what's going to be generating tax revenue for the city and economic sustainability for the people who live here, jobs, income, etc. That I get. And again, I don't know enough about the subject matter area to know whether there are certain very big, I'm not talking about internet or cars, or I'm talking about big areas, again, whether, that we should be breaking it into as we focus our panels
And
do our panels.
I think our city manager would like to jump in here.
Good.
Well, I agree with what Andy has already shared, and the only reason I'm jumping in is because I think it's important to at least the way we've seen it, is there's at least three different intersecting issues here. One is the economics, and these are global and regional trends. Because the reality is there's no such thing as a Santa Monica economy.
Right.
Right. There are businesses who address inside our city, and as we saw from our buy local, there are people who are oriented towards selling. But there's no the border at Rose and Centinela and the Canyon doesn't. The economy doesn't stop there. It doesn't even stop at the water's edge. So there's the economy issue, which you're pushing on, but there's also, and you referenced it, there's how the public sector will derive sustainable tax revenue in the 21st century, because we're operating on essentially an early 20th century tax system, which puts a premium on the sale of goods and doesn't on services. And of course, the goods economy is clearly shrinking, and the service economy is clearly growing. So there's a second piece, and then the third piece is place, is how in a swirling and changing economy you establish what some economists would call stickiness, other economists would call clusters, other economists would call niches. But where do we, in this landscape, where do we fit in? And that's where what Andy was saying about aligning with our values. What we're wanting to do is a fairly broad perspective at this stage to see where the opportunities are, and that's where rather than sort of taking on the whole thing because we're going to take on the whole thing, which I understand why you're you're looking for us to narrow in, but I think what we narrow in is where are Santa Monica's opportunities, because we're not Boulder, we're not Temecula, we're not Singapore, we're not Tegucigalpa. We have, what is it in this global economy and in the regional Southern California, what are our opportunities? Our opportunities 30 years ago were tourism, and now we're generating $60 million a year in bed tax. Our opportunity was high-end office, and now we have so much of it that we have almost an embarrassment of riches as well as traffic. And the third, it was retail, in which we were the pioneer in Southern California of the return to street level retail. Those were three opportunities that Santa Monica seized upon that built on its natural. So I see you anxious to jump in. So go ahead.
Well, I'm anxious only because you say I want to narrow in, but actually I sort of want to go the other direction. Because I'm not looking at how we get, because I think things move more quickly now.
Mm-hmm.
And that a lot of this needs to be about process rather than now we're going to do retail, whatever it was then. I think that things are changing quickly enough that what we need is a process of approaching economic sustainability more than we need to know what we're going to be doing tomorrow.
I think we're in the same place. I don't think we see emerging from this as a blueprint that we will follow assiduously for 10 years, and at the end of 10 years we'll have produced some miraculous formula that will guarantee our economic sustainability for another 30 years. We agree that it is somewhat dynamic. I think actually our assumptions are very similar. The only difference, and that's why we're bringing it here, is that we think at this stage we ought to be fairly broad. And then it's the next stage, phase 2, that we'll be bringing back to you our preliminary expectations about where to go, where you're going.
Thank you.
All right, Councilmember McEwen.
Staff is asking us tonight to give direction, and I think it's important that in giving that direction, we not limit the outcomes, because we frankly have no way of knowing what this is going to lead us to. The problem with predetermination is that it's inherently based on your past experience, what you think is going to be important. And I think we're looking at a future full of disruption and discontinuity that we can't really predict. So I think what we need to do is to start a process and not worry yet exactly where that process will take us, just make sure it's an effective process. So I looked at the alternatives that the staff provided us in the staff report. The speaker series, the council meeting panels, the council subcommittees, and consultant study, and I think any one of those would be deficient compared to the recommendation, which is the sort of open-ended panel where we can get disparate opinions on the same stage and let ideas contest for our interest and let new ideas come forth. My concern, however, in looking at the staff report is the narrowness of the outreach that I see in the staff report so far. It says that staff has initiated preliminary conversations with potential partners, including the Santa Monica Chamber of Commerce, Downtown Santa Monica, Inc., and Santa Monica Travel and Tourism. Where are the social justice groups? Where are the young tech innovators who aren't particularly active in the chamber? Where are our schools and universities? And most of all, where are our residents in those panels? And it mentions that short list on page 3 of the staff report. On page 5, it repeats it. And I just want to make sure that this process is not driven only by the existing power players, because they know how to play the old game. And we're talking about a whole new game, and I think we need to bring some new people in who think of it differently. It does say on page 5 that we will be talking to academics and researchers. I think that is a very important part of this. But again, I think just people who live in Santa Monica are going to, who, by the way, are leaders in any number of industries. It's remarkable if you find out who lives in Santa Monica, how many different ways of economic success are represented among our residents. Let's tap into that too. Let's just not talk to the organized groups that have always done business the way business has always been done.
I don't think that's our perspective to think by looking backwards in the rearview mirror. I think the reason they're called partners is because I think we want to bring along the major business organizations in our city to be part of this because of just what you've said. They need to be looking ahead and thinking broadly. The other voices you've heard, we definitely assume we will be outreaching to, but that's different from a sort of formally enlisting the three major economic partners that the city has long had in joining in this forward-looking dialogue.
My direction as a council member is just I do want to see those other parties reached out to and part of this process because I think they have tremendous value.
We agree.
Well, and I'm going to follow up on that a bit because while I agree that since we're talking about economic development, I would actually like to see the bids other than downtown Santa Monica specifically included. I think that right now some of the economic challenges or the canaries in the coal mine that we're seeing are Montana Avenue and Main Street. And I think that it's important because they are very different than downtown in both how they operate, their target audience, that sort of thing. So I just want to make sure they're included there as well. I have a couple of comments. I agree with Councilmember McEwen that I think the panel discussions would be the most productive at this point in time. I think it's really important to start to have, for lack of a better term, sort of an academic/educational exchange where we can see different ideas and how they play out and the pros and the cons before we really start thinking this is what we're thinking about for the future. But while we're doing all that, I do want to make a couple of comments. And the first one is I think that as we ask people to be on these panels, we obviously need to give them guidance. And I think one of the things we want to talk about is to the best we can identifying trends. I certainly agree with Councilmember Himmelrich that for me it's not just about substantively what's the future going to look like, but for me it's about how do we as a city council or a municipal government anticipate those trends, because so often what happens, and we saw this happen a little bit with Uber and Lyft and some of those, is we spend years formulating a taxi franchise industry, and then they come in and totally disrupt it. And our ordinances and our regulations are totally antiquated. Sorry about that. I don't even have the excuse that it's late, or obsolete. I mean, so how do we create more agility? And maybe it means being less specific in some ordinances or designating or delegating some responsibility so that we can be agile. So as we see these economic disruptors happening, we can immediately take advantage of them rather than having to have 6 months of study session and a couple of months of, drafting an ordinance. And by then we're on to something new. So I think I agree with Councilmember Himmelrich that a lot of this is process and what do we need to do internally to change our processes to be more proactive really, but proactive and reactive and able to deal with these repeated disruptions. The second thing is I do think we need to bring into the discussion the externalities, the things that we can't control. Climate change, regional population disruptions. I mean, as we sit here tonight, there are literally thousands of people who've been evacuated from their homes because of fires. Is that going to be a trend we're going to see? Because while it doesn't seem like that's going to directly affect us, if the effect of climate change, for example, is to bring sea level up to the bike path, if the effect of climate change is to drive more people out of Ventura and farther out into Ojai or whatever, I mean, I think we actually, need to think about what are those externalities. Some of it's what's happening at the federal level, decisions that are being made that affect our ability to support our own initiatives. So I want to make sure that we're not so internally focused on our own belly button that we really have in the backs of our minds. It's about being resilient. We talk about that a lot, being resilient in the face of externalities that we can't control. And then the third thing to me that's really clear, and I think it was mentioned in your presentation, but I really want to emphasize it, is we need to build a local economy that has on-ramps for everybody. And that's education, that's economic opportunity, that's making sure that we have ordinances to protect workers and give people opportunities to succeed, that we have affordable housing, that we do our best to provide the essential services to people. Because what I don't want to see happen in Santa Monica is what we unfortunately see happen at the national level, where the economy works for one slice of people, but it doesn't work for everyone else. And I think that while none of us up here would certainly want that to happen, that's inconsistent with our goals, not consistent, as you mentioned, that sometimes it happens if we don't pay attention to it. That's a piece that really has to be nurtured and focused on, because it's very easy to say, oh, look, we're making money, the economy's good, we've got a AAA bond rating, there's sales tax coming in, and certain people are thriving, but other people are being left behind. And I think if we don't make that sort of the constant drumbeat of how does this economy serve everyone and how do we make sure everyone has an opportunity to share in the economy's success, I think we'll be doing our constituents a disfavor. So those are my comments. It looks like staff is actually asking us to make a motion to review, consider, and provide direction regarding the process to develop the scope of the city's long-term economic sustainability strategy. Is anyone willing?
Incorporating the comments that we've already made as that direction, yeah, I'll make that motion.
Second.
All right, moved by Councilmember McEwen, seconded by Councilmember O'Connor. May we have a vote?
Councilmember Kim?
Yes.
Councilmember Vasquez?
Yes.
Councilmember Himmelrich?
Yes.
Councilmember O'Connor?
Yes.
And Mayor Pro Tem Davis?
Yes, that passes unanimously 5-0. I believe this is a special meeting, so we do not have public comment. So we are at the end of our agenda, but I believe we do have an adjournment.
Yeah, Council, I'm going to ask that we adjourn tonight in memory of Mallory Smith, a young environmentalist who lived in Santa Monica after graduating from Stanford and who died a couple of weeks ago at the age of only 25. Mallory Smith suffered from childhood with severe cystic fibrosis, and yet she became a varsity athlete in high school and college. Her energy and her determination spurred her to do battle with the environmental ills facing our planet in this age of climate change, perhaps seeing the global devastation as parallel to the illness that continued to devastate her own body. Mallory produced environmental reports for Green Grid Radio. She wrote a book about the Gottlieb Garden at the Theodore Payne Foundation. And her environmental work always included a strong focus on something we just talked about, social justice and sustainability. Unfortunately, Mallory Smith's cystic fibrosis was relentless. After a long-awaited lung transplant in September and celebrating her 25th birthday in October, Mallory Smith succumbed to a treatment-resistant infection and complications just 2 weeks ago. Mallory leaves behind her parents, Mark and Diane Smith, her brother Micah, and many heartbroken friends. Mallory Smith, an inspiring life, but at 25 years, far too short.
Thank you for sharing that with us. At this point, we will adjourn, and our next meeting is a week from tonight, December 12th. Thank you all.